I pressed the tip of my titanium pen to the cremation authorization form, and my mother-in-law slapped it right out of my hand. The heavy metal clatter echoed across the sterile reception desk of the Seattle Trauma Center. "You will not burn my son like garbage," Valerie hissed. Her manicured fingers hovered inches from my face, her chest heaving under a damp designer shawl. I looked at the pen resting on the laminate counter. I picked it up. I clicked the top. Then I signed my name on the bottom line anyway. I did not shed a single tear. The relentless October rain in Washington state beat against the glass lobby doors, blurring the glow of the ambulance lights outside. Less than an hour ago, the medical examiner confirmed Derek met a concrete barrier on Interstate 5. He was pushing his imported sports car at 90 miles an hour on slick asphalt. Before I continue the story of how I systematically crushed his mistress and her forged inheritance, let me know your age in the comments below, and welcome back to Melissa Told Stories. I am a senior supply chain auditor for a global retail giant. My entire career relies on mapping bottlenecks and mitigating liabilities. When a trans-Pacific shipping route fails, you do not stand on the dock and weep over lost cargo. You recalculate. I applied that exact clinical mindset to my sudden widowhood. Valerie cared only about her Mercer Island Country Club optics. She demanded a lavish, open-casket memorial, willfully ignoring the physical reality of a high-speed collision. She wanted a pristine son to mourn in front of her socialite friends. I handed the clipboard back to the pale hospital administrator. "No viewing," I instructed, keeping my voice level. "Direct transfer to the crematory. Do not prepare the body." Valerie grabbed the wet fabric of my trench coat. Her nails dug into my arm. "You cold, calculating machine," she spat, her breath smelling of stale coffee and panic. "I will call the police. I will tell them you tampered with his brakes. You are erasing my son to hide your own guilt." I pried her fingers off my sleeve one by one. I pulled a plastic evidence bag from my tote and held it up to the fluorescent hospital lights. Inside sat Derek's cracked smartphone, recovered from the wreckage. The screen was frozen on a drafted text message. "Almost to Bellevue, Monica," I read aloud, watching the color drain from Valerie's face. "Tell the baby daddy is hurrying." I lowered the bag. "I am not erasing your son, Valerie. I am just cleaning up his logistics." Before she could formulate another threat, the automatic doors hissed open. A gust of cold, pine-scented wind swept into the lobby. A young woman stepped through the threshold. She wore a tailored jacket I recognized from my own recent bank statements. She clutched a heavy infant car seat against her hip. Inside, a baby let out a sharp, demanding cry. The woman did not approach the triage desk. Her eyes darted around the room until they locked directly onto us. She stepped forward, lifting her chin, carrying the reckless confidence of someone who believed she held the winning hand. The true disruption had just arrived. The woman stood under the harsh fluorescent lights of the trauma center lobby, bringing the cold dampness of the Seattle storm inside with her. Rain dripped from the hem of her tailored wool coat. I immediately recognized the unique asymmetrical stitching on the lapel. It was a boutique brand located in the downtown commercial district. Derek purchased that exact garment 3 months ago. He claimed it was a corporate retirement gift for a senior executive assistant at his manufacturing firm. Seeing the expensive fabric wrapped around a stranger holding an infant instantly clarified a lingering discrepancy in our household ledger. The missing funds were not a banking error. Monica did not shrink under the sterile medical glare or the presence of the hospital staff. She stepped forward with her chin held high, carrying the reckless confidence of a gambler who firmly believed she held the winning hand. She scanned the room, bypassing the triage nurses and the security guards, zeroing in on the undeniable tension radiating between my mother-in-law and me. Her eyes locked directly onto my face. "I am Monica," she announced. Her voice carried clearly over the low hum of the medical monitors down the hall. Derek was rushing back to my Bellevue condo when his car hydroplaned. He was coming home to us. She shifted her weight, bringing the baby carrier forward. The infant inside let out another demanding wail, a sharp, piercing sound that sliced through the lingering scent of clinical antiseptic. He was hurrying to see his son, Monica added, driving the point forward like a blade meant to sever my composure. He promised he was starting his real family today. I watched my mother-in-law process this sudden revelation. A typical parent might collapse upon hearing her son died while speeding toward a secret second life. Valerie did not collapse. The theatrical tears drying on her cheeks vanished instantly. The suffocating grief she had weaponized against me mere seconds ago evaporated as if it never existed. Valerie turned her full attention toward the crying infant. A terrifying psychological shift occurred right in front of the reception desk. During the 5 years of my marriage, Valerie berated me at every holiday dinner and summer gathering. She constantly criticized my grueling hours at the e-commerce firm. She told her affluent peers that my professional ambition was unnatural. She referred to my womb as a barren wasteland, insisting that a corporate director title meant nothing without a biological heir to carry forward the family prestige. Now staring at the baby in Monica's arms, Valerie saw her coveted legacy delivered on a silver platter. Valerie dropped her damp shawl onto a nearby waiting room chair. She glided across the lobby toward the mistress. There was no outrage. There was no condemnation for the woman who actively aided in the destruction of her son's marriage. Valerie reached out a trembling hand, displaying a perfect French manicure, and gently brushed the baby's cheek. "He has Derek's eyes," Valerie whispered. Her tone carried a reverent, sickening awe. "He has the exact same brow line." Monica nodded eagerly, absorbing the older woman's validation. "We were supposed to be a family," Monica said, leaning into the mother-in-law to cement their new bond. "Derek wanted us to have everything." The alliance formed in less than a minute. 2 women, bound by shared greed, united against the primary obstacle standing in the room. Me. Valerie spun around to face me. The reverence she showed the infant morphed back into venomous spite. She stepped away from Monica and closed the physical distance between us. She pointed a manicured finger at the center of my chest. "Derek is gone," Valerie stated, entirely ignoring the cremation forms resting on the counter just inches away. "But his bloodline survives. This boy is the true heir. You are nothing but a temporary placeholder, Christina. You have no right to hoard my son's estate." I maintained a flat, steady gaze. I kept my breathing even. When facing a hostile vendor during a supply chain negotiation, revealing your pulse is a fatal error. I applied the same stoicism here. "Hand over the keys to the Kirkland waterfront house," Valerie demanded, holding out her open palm. "That property was purchased with Derek's initial down payment. It belongs to his son. Give me the keys right now. I need to safeguard his personal belongings before you try to liquidate his history." Monica stood closely behind her, a smug smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She bounced the baby on her hip, waiting for me to surrender my territory. I analyzed their aggressive posture. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to feel the crushing weight of betrayal, to break down sobbing in the middle of a public hospital and surrender physical access to a multi-million-dollar asset just to escape their cruelty. It was a classic red herring. In corporate auditing, when a department manager points your attention toward a minor discrepancy, they are almost always hiding a catastrophic failure somewhere else in the ledger. Valerie and Monica were demanding physical keys to a house that required a formal probate process to legally transfer. You cannot simply hand over real estate in a hospital lobby. They were deliberately trying to create a chaotic distraction. They wanted me focused on the physical property so I would not look at the liquid accounts. I reached into my coat pocket and felt the cold metal of my car keys. I did not pull them out. Instead, I reached down and grasped the heavy brass zipper of my designer tote bag. I pulled it shut with a smooth, decisive motion. The sharp click of the zipper locking into place was the only answer I provided. "You cannot ignore me," Valerie hissed, stepping directly into my path to block my exit. "You owe this child his rightful legacy." I stepped around her, my sensible heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. I did not utter a single word of defense. I did not engage with the mistress holding a child dressed in garments funded by my joint checking account. I bypassed the triage desk, ignored the wide-eyed stares of the nursing staff, and walked directly toward the sliding glass doors. "You cold coward!" Valerie yelled after me, her voice echoing loudly off the sterile walls. "Run away to your empty house! You have nothing left!" The automatic doors parted. The cold, wet Washington air hit my face, carrying the scent of damp pine needles and exhaust fumes. I stepped out into the relentless rain. Behind me, they celebrated my retreat. They thought my silence was the hallmark of a defeated barren widow, fleeing from a public humiliation. They thought they had successfully intimidated me into a corner where I would quietly wither away. They possessed a fatal lack of logistical understanding. I was not fleeing. I was securing a perimeter. They had just declared war in a hospital lobby, expecting a localized emotional skirmish. They had no idea they had triggered a confrontation with a woman who optimized billion-dollar global supply chains for a living. I did not deal in petty arguments or theatrical shouting matches. I dealt in systemic eradication. I pulled my trench coat tighter against the biting wind and walked toward my vehicle, already calculating the precise digital strikes required to freeze every single financial asset bearing Derek's name. The drive from the trauma center across the SR 520 floating bridge took 30 minutes. The rain hammered against my windshield, blurring the headlights of oncoming traffic into streaks of frantic white light. I kept my grip loose on the steering wheel, regulating my breathing. My mind was already cataloging the required steps for asset preservation. I pulled into the driveway of my Kirkland waterfront home. The property was a significant investment, secured primarily through my corporate bonuses over the past 5 years. The rain slicked the stone pathway leading to the entrance. When I unlocked the front door, the silence of the house pressed against my ears. Derek's leather shoes sat neatly by the entryway console. His wool coat hung on the brass hook. The faint scent of his cedar aftershave lingered in the hallway air. A typical spouse might fall to her knees right there, paralyzed by the sudden, suffocating void of a life interrupted. I bypassed the emotional weight of the empty rooms. I did not pause in the kitchen to stare at his coffee mug. I walked straight into my home office, shut the door, and pressed the power button on my encrypted corporate laptop. Grief is an inefficient metric. It provides zero actionable data. I needed a forensic audit. It takes a surprisingly short amount of time to sever a shared financial existence if you understand the architecture of the modern banking system. Within 20 minutes, I systematically dismantled our joint digital footprint. I logged into our primary checking portal, authenticated my credentials, and initiated a hard freeze blocking all outgoing transactions. I locked the shared investment portfolios, restricting any liquidations or transfers. I accessed my corporate payroll dashboard and rerouted my upcoming e-commerce salary deposits into a private single signer account I had maintained since before the marriage. In supply chain logistics, when a vendor is compromised, you instantly quarantine the network. You cut their access to your inventory before the contagion spreads. Derek was no longer my partner. He was a compromised entity, and his mother and mistress were hostile actors, attempting an unapproved acquisition. Once the perimeter was secure, I began reviewing our recent expense reports. I needed to understand the current liquidity of the estate to anticipate their next strike. I exported the credit card statements into a spreadsheet, running a macro to highlight irregular spending patterns. As I scrolled through the categorized data, a subtle, jarring detail caught my eye. It was a line item from 3 weeks ago, billed from a high-end automotive performance shop in Bellevue. The invoice totaled $10,000. I accessed our cloud storage and pulled up the digitized receipt. The expense was labeled as a custom suspension upgrade for his sports car. Derek had told me he needed the vehicle serviced for a smoother commute down Interstate 405. I had approved the budget without a second glance, trusting his assessment of his own vehicle. Now staring at the itemized parts list, the math failed to align. The shop had installed a heavy-duty reinforced coilover system designed for bearing extreme weight. Derek was a mid-level manager at an Everett aerospace manufacturing firm. He wore tailored suits and sat in a climate-controlled office analyzing production spreadsheets for commercial jetliners. He did not haul lumber. He did not tow boats. You do not install a reinforced payload suspension on a luxury sports car for highway driving. You install that specific hardware to carry exceptionally heavy loads without the rear bumper dragging on the asphalt. It was an illogical expense. It was a physical preparation for a task that did not fit his corporate profile. I filed the anomaly in the back of my mind. A suspension upgrade alone meant nothing without understanding where the rest of the capital was flowing. I pivoted my focus back to the primary routing history. If he lied about the automotive hardware, the ledger harbored other discrepancies. I expanded the search parameters, filtering all outbound wire transfers for the past 8 months. The pattern emerged on my high-resolution monitor in a matter of seconds. He was draining marital assets into a financial black hole, every 2 weeks aligning perfectly with his aerospace pay schedule. A substantial wire transfer bypassed our joint savings. The funds were being routed into an external unlisted account. I ran the routing digits through the Washington State Secretary of State Public Business Registry. The database query returned a match within seconds. The receiving account belonged to an obscure limited liability company. The registered address for the LLC was an unmarked commercial suite located in Bellevue. It was the exact same city where his mistress resided. I scrutinized the public filings. The LLC listed a registered agent service designed to mask the true ownership of the entity. But financial networks always leave a trail. I cross-referenced the incorporation date with our household ledger. The pieces of his betrayal began snapping together with cold precision. He was not just buying expensive dinners or booking luxury hotel rooms. He was systematically bleeding our shared wealth, funneling the capital into a corporate shell entity. I tracked the timeline of the LLC incorporation. It matched the exact week his late-night shifts at the Everett aerospace plant supposedly began. Everett houses some of the most secure manufacturing facilities in the world. As a supply chain auditor, I knew that aerospace managers do not work unexpected midnight shifts unless there is a critical disruption on the assembly floor. He had used his job as a shield to build a shadow economy. I opened a blank digital whiteboard on my screen and started mapping the logistics of his deception. I needed to trace the precise dollar amount he had siphoned. I linked the wire transfers, calculating the burn rate of our missing savings. The numbers were escalating. Whatever he was funding in Bellevue required an increasing influx of cash. A sharp chime from my smartphone shattered the quiet hum of my home office. It was a proximity alert from my exterior security system. I tapped the notification, bringing up the live video feed from the front porch camera. A black, luxury SUV had just sped into my driveway, the tires tearing through the wet gravel. I recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Valerie. The passenger door swung open. Monica stepped out into the pouring Washington rain. She did not bother with an umbrella. She marched up the concrete walkway toward my front porch, her tailored jacket absorbing the downpour. The infant was not with her this time. She moved with purposeful, driven energy. I watched her through the high-definition camera feed. She reached the top step and approached my heavy mahogany door. She did not knock. She did not ring the doorbell. She knew I was inside, and she knew a face-to-face confrontation would yield her nothing. Instead, she bent down, retrieving a thick folded paper from her pocket. She slid the document underneath the heavy wooden door. The white paper scraped against the hardwood floor of my entryway, coming to rest just a few feet from where I sat in my office. Monica stood up, shot a triumphant glare directly into the lens of the security camera, and turned on her heel. She walked back to the idling SUV, climbed inside, and the vehicle reversed out of my driveway, disappearing into the gray afternoon. I remained in my ergonomic desk chair for a long moment, watching the empty driveway on the monitor. I stood up, smoothed the front of my slacks, and walked down the hallway to the entryway. The folded paper lay stark white against the dark walnut floorboards. I did not open the door to check if they were truly gone. I knew they were already planning their next maneuver. I bent down and retrieved the document. The paper felt heavy premium grade. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes scanning the dense legal typography. I recognized the format immediately. It was not a simple letter of intent. It was the opening salvo of a legal execution. The document resting in my hands was printed on thick, embossed legal paper. It carried the official seal of a notary public located in King County, dated precisely 21 days ago. I stood in the quiet hallway of my Kirkland home, the rain still drumming against the exterior walls, and read the text. It was a secondary last will and testament, bearing Derek's signature. The opening paragraphs were standard boilerplate, establishing sound mind and body. The subsequent clauses, however, executed a ruthless financial severance. The document explicitly revoked my status as the primary beneficiary of his corporate life insurance policy. Derek worked as a mid-level manager at one of Everett's massive aerospace manufacturing plants. His compensation package included a substantial life insurance policy valued at $1.5 million. This secondary will redirected the entirety of those funds. Furthermore, it transferred full control and ownership of the mysterious Bellevue LLC directly into an irrevocable trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust was Monica's 6-month-old infant. I walked back into my home office, the legal document hanging heavy in my hand. I dropped it onto the glass surface of my desk, right beside my glowing laptop screen. The audacity of the maneuver was striking, but the execution was flawed. While Monica had stood on my porch shouting through the heavy mahogany door that Derek's empire belonged to her, she revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of wealth management. She believed this notarized paper was a romantic declaration, a final sweeping gesture from a man prioritizing his secret family over his legal wife. She saw $1 million payout and the keys to a corporate entity. She possessed the reckless arrogance of someone who only looked at the top line of a balance sheet. As a senior supply chain auditor, I never stop at the top line. I analyze the foundation. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and stared at the secondary will. My analytical mind, honed by years of mapping billion-dollar logistical networks, immediately identified the glaring, logical discrepancy. The timeline did not make sense. Derek had recently spent $10,000 on a heavy-duty suspension upgrade for his sport to haul significant weight. He had been steadily siphoning marital assets into the Bellevue LLC for 8 months, creating an expanding financial black hole. Those were the actions of a man deeply invested in a living, ongoing operation. So why would a man actively expanding a secret enterprise suddenly draft a post-death document to give it all away? A secondary will only activates upon the death of the testator. It holds zero power while the individual is alive. If Derek was pouring resources into the Bellevue LLC, he intended to reap the benefits of that entity in the present. Drafting a will to transfer it to an infant offered him no immediate tactical advantage, unless he was terrified of a sudden, catastrophic disruption. The math crystallized in my mind with cold, terrifying clarity. Derek had not drafted this will out of profound love for his mistress or an unexpected surge of paternal devotion. He drafted it out of pure, calculated fear. Derek knew exactly who he had married. He knew my professional capabilities. He knew that if he were to die unexpectedly, standard probate laws would automatically transfer his entire estate to me, his legal spouse. If I inherited his estate, I would also inherit control of his financial records. I would run a comprehensive audit. I would uncover the missing funds, trace the wire transfers, and expose the Bellevue LLC. I would dismantle his hidden operation within a week. This forged will was not a romantic gesture. It was a desperate legal failsafe. Derek had weaponized the legal system to build a firewall. He forged the document to ensure that in the event of his sudden death, the Bellevue LLC and all its associated assets and liabilities would bypass me entirely. By placing the entity into a trust controlled by Monica, he intended to keep the operation completely insulated from my forensic scrutiny. He believed that if he died, his secrets would remain buried with his mistress. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of an audit. You cannot bury a liability. You can only transfer it. I looked at the security camera feed on my secondary monitor. The driveway was empty now. Monica had driven away, clutching her copy of the forged will, convinced she had delivered a fatal strike to my financial security. She believed she was claiming a fortune. She was visualizing the $1.5 million payout and the prestige of owning a corporate entity. She failed to realize the true nature of the asset she was so aggressively demanding. The Bellevue LLC was not a legitimate business generating revenue. The recurring wire transfers from our joint accounts proved it was a sinkhole, requiring constant influxes of marital cash to stay afloat. The heavy-duty suspension upgrade on Derek's car suggested illicit physical logistics. This was not a startup. It was a laundering mechanism. By actively demanding the estate and validating the forged will in probate court, Monica was not inheriting an empire. She was legally positioning herself to absorb absolute liability for a massive, heavily concealed financial crime. She was eagerly volunteering to become the primary target for whatever federal agency eventually noticed the discrepancies in the aerospace plant's inventory. She thought she was stealing my wealth. In reality, she was shielding me from the blast radius. The realization settled over me, replacing the initial shock with a profound, icy calm. I did not need to fight her for the life insurance policy. I did not need to tear up the forged will. I needed to let her hold it. I needed to let her wrap her arms tightly around the toxic asset Derek had created. But before I could optimize the transfer of that liability, I needed to understand exactly what the Bellevue LLC was hiding. I needed to know the precise magnitude of the crime Monica was about to inherit. I turned back to my encrypted laptop, ready to bypass the surface-level bank statements and dig into the deep architecture of Derek's digital footprint. Before my fingers could even touch the keyboard, my smartphone illuminated. A series of rapid notifications flooded the screen, the vibration buzzing angrily against the glass desk. The alerts were not from my banking apps or my security cameras. They were from LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Monica had not just delivered a legal document. She had launched a coordinated digital offensive. She was impatient. She wanted the funds released immediately, and she knew probate court could take months. She was attempting to bypass the legal system entirely by weaponizing the court of public opinion. She was aiming directly at the most vulnerable point in my perimeter, my professional reputation. The assault did not come through another legal document slid under my door. It arrived in a relentless barrage of digital notifications that illuminated my home office with a frantic, pulsating rhythm. I sat back in my chair, watching the screen of my smartphone light up. The alerts were cascading so rapidly, they began to blur together. They were not internal corporate emails or standard bank confirmations. They were direct tags on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Monica had realized the limitations of her physical presence. Finding the doors to the Kirkland waterfront home secured and discovering the liquid accounts frozen, she understood she could not win a war of attrition against an auditor. A probate court battle could drag on for months, requiring capital she did not possess. She needed immediate access to the $1.5 million life insurance policy. To bypass the legal system, she bypassed privacy entirely. She launched a nuclear public relations strike designed to force my immediate surrender through public humiliation. I tapped the first notification, bringing up a GoFundMe campaign page. The design was meticulously engineered to elicit maximum sympathy and outrage. The header image featured a heartbreaking candid photograph of the 6-month-old infant, tears glistening on his cheeks, juxtaposed directly beside a professional portrait of Derek. The imagery was potent, a visual declaration of a shattered family. But it was the headline that revealed Monica's true target. She did not merely ask for charitable donations to support a grieving mother. She weaponized my specific corporate identity. The bold text read, "Global e-commerce executive uses high-powered corporate lawyers to starve fatherless infant after cremating husband to hide evidence." She had specifically tagged my employer's official accounts across all platforms. I scrolled through the campaign description. Monica painted herself as a working-class victim, a devoted mother blindsided by tragedy, now being systematically crushed by a ruthless progressive tech elite. She claimed I had expedited Derek's cremation solely to destroy potential evidence that could have proven his intent to leave me. She alleged I was hoarding marital funds, leaving an innocent child destitute. The narrative was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, perfectly calibrated to ignite the specific societal outrage prevalent in Washington's progressive tech hubs. The public loves a villain with a corporate title, and Monica had cast me perfectly in the role. The comments section was already a cesspool of vitriol. Hundreds of strangers were demanding my immediate termination. They called me a sociopath, a corporate monster, and a disgrace to humanity. They demanded justice for the fatherless child. The campaign had amassed tens of thousands of dollars in donations within hours, but the money was secondary. The primary goal was to generate enough public pressure to break my professional resolve. I refreshed the page, noting the rapid increase in shares and engagement. The amplification was not organic. Valerie and her daughter Lauren were actively accelerating the smear campaign. My mother-in-law, who had spent decades cultivating a pristine reputation among the Mercer Island Country Club elite, was now eagerly weaponizing her social network against me. Lauren, my sister-in-law, was retweeting the campaign with inflammatory comments, corroborating Monica's narrative of my supposed cruelty. They were working in perfect, toxic synchronization. Monica assumed that a woman who had spent a decade climbing the corporate ladder of a global e-commerce giant would be terrified of a public scandal. She believed I would look at the viral outrage panic about my professional standing and offer a swift, quiet financial settlement out of court to make the nightmare disappear. She thought I would gladly hand over the life insurance policy to salvage my reputation. She was playing a game of emotional extortion. She wanted me to feel surrounded, isolated, and overwhelmed by the sheer volume of public hatred. I stared at the glowing screen, the harsh blue light reflecting in my eyes. A lesser professional might have drafted a frantic defensive response, attempting to argue with the mob online. I knew better. In crisis management, engaging with a viral smear campaign only feeds the algorithm. You do not argue with a fire. You cut off its oxygen. I closed the browser tabs and placed my phone face down on the glass desk. Monica was utilizing the internet to construct a narrative built entirely on a foundation of lies. She was relying on the assumption that I would prioritize public perception over forensic truth. She was completely unaware of the digital avalanche I was preparing to unleash. I turned back to my encrypted laptop, ignoring the vibrating phone beside me. The public outrage was a loud, distracting variable. It was another red herring, designed to force my hand before I could complete my audit. I needed to finalize the logistical map of Derek's betrayal. I had identified the Bellevue LLC. I had recognized the forged will as a legal firewall. Now I needed to understand the true origin of the capital he was funneling into that corporate shell. The $10,000 suspension upgrade on his sports car remained the critical anomaly. An aerospace manager does not need reinforced coils for a highway commute. He needs them to transport heavy illicit cargo without arousing suspicion. I initiated a deep dive into the corporate networks I could still legally access. I bypassed our personal financial statements and began reviewing the public records associated with Derek's manufacturing firm in Everett. I needed to determine if there were any recent significant disruptions at his facility. If he was moving heavy cargo, he was likely moving company assets. Before I could execute the search query, a new notification breached my focused silence. It was not a social media alert. It was an urgent calendar invite, bypassing my personal filters and dropping directly onto my corporate schedule. The sender was the vice president of auditing at my e-commerce firm. The subject line was stark and uncompromising. Mandatory disciplinary review. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning at 8 o'clock sharp. Monica's strike had hit its intended target. The viral campaign had penetrated the corporate firewall, and the executives were demanding answers. The sanctuary of my career, the one area of my life that had remained untouched by Derek's betrayal, was now under direct threat. I accepted the calendar invite with a single keystroke. The pressure was escalating, constricting my timeline. I had to dismantle a forged will, expose a hidden LLC, and destroy a viral smear campaign before I lost everything I had spent a decade building. I needed undeniable empirical proof of their fraud, and I needed it immediately. The pristine glass architecture of our corporate headquarters usually offered a sense of structured tranquility. Situated in the heart of the South Lake Union District, the building stood as a monument to modern retail efficiency. I swiped my security badge at the primary turnstiles right at 7 in the morning, shaking the pervasive drizzle from my umbrella. Routine forms the foundation of an auditor's life. You monitor the daily baseline to detect operational anomalies. The deviation registered before I even reached the main elevator bank. The usual morning hum of the lobby felt muted, replaced by a tense, heavy atmosphere. Coworkers holding premium coffee cups quickly averted their gazes as I walked past the reception desk. A junior financial analyst near the espresso bar abruptly stopped talking, staring down at his smartphone as if he had seen a ghost. In global logistics, a sudden drop in ambient noise on the warehouse floor signals a critical system failure. In a Seattle corporate tech hub, localized silence means you are the subject of a viral scandal. My posture remained rigid. I stepped into the stainless steel elevator, watching the digital floor numbers ascend, bracing for the inevitable collision. I reached my designated floor, fully expecting to boot up my workstation and finalize a quarterly compliance report. Instead, the executive assistant for the vice president of auditing stood waiting by my ergonomic chair. She held a digital clipboard tight against her chest, her expression tight and overly professional. She informed me that Victor Caldwell required my presence in his office immediately. Victor occupied a corner suite, walled entirely in transparent acoustic glass. The architectural design was meant to project corporate transparency, but today it felt like an interrogation room on public display. I walked across the open-plan office floor. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes tracking my movement, scrutinizing my every step. I did not speed up my pace or lower my head. I walked with the measured stride of a director who controlled her environment. I entered the corner office and closed the heavy glass door, sealing out the murmurs of my peers. Victor did not offer me a seat. He stood behind his polished oak desk, staring out at the rain-slicked streets of the city. He turned around, his features drawn into a tight, pragmatic line. He was a man who navigated billions of dollars in global inventory. He possessed zero tolerance for unpredictable liabilities. Without issuing a customary greeting, Victor reached across his desk and slid a silver tablet toward my side of the table. The screen was illuminated, displaying the professional networking platform we used for industry communication. I looked down at the glowing display. Monica's face stared back at me. It was her viral campaign post, amplified and pushed directly into my professional sphere. I analyzed the engagement metrics beneath the image. The post had accumulated 15,000 shares, generating thousands of furious comments overnight. The digital wildfire had breached the firewall of my professional sanctuary with terrifying speed. The headline glared in bold black font, accusing a global e-commerce executive of utilizing high-powered attorneys to starve a fatherless infant after rushing a cremation to hide criminal evidence. She had deliberately tagged our corporate handle, dragging the entire brand into her fabricated domestic dispute. My mother-in-law had seeded the post through her affluent Mercer Island networks, ensuring it reached the screens of local business leaders, industry journalists, and our board of directors. The digital footprint was sprawling, out of control, threatening to consume everything in its path. I scrolled through the comment section with a steady hand. The vitriol was staggering. Strangers hiding behind corporate avatars were demanding my immediate termination. They called for consumer boycotts. They labeled me a sociopath, a corporate monster, and a disgrace to modern society. They demanded swift justice for the innocent child depicted in the photograph. Monica was leveraging society's inherent sympathy for a struggling mother to execute a high-tech shakedown. She knew that battling a widow in probate court would drain her limited resources. By weaponizing the internet, she intended to bypass the legal system entirely, forcing a rapid capitulation. Victor leaned forward, planting his knuckles on the polished wood of his desk. He stated that our retail brand relies on flawless, ethical optics. Consumers trust us with their sensitive financial data, and shareholders expect pristine moral leadership. Having a senior auditor publicly accused of such profound cruelty creates an unacceptable corporate liability. He did not ask for my side of the story or inquire about the truth of the allegations. In his pragmatic world, the empirical truth mattered far less than the public perception of reality. He issued his directive with cold, calculated efficiency. I was to contact my legal counsel, arrange a quiet financial settlement with this woman, and extinguish the scandal by Friday afternoon. If I failed to produce a signed non-disclosure agreement ending the public spectacle, Human Resources would place me on indefinite, unpaid leave to protect the company's image. The air in the glass office felt suddenly thin, as if the ventilation system had failed. A suspension meant far more than a temporary pause in my monthly salary. It meant the immediate freezing of my unvested stock options, the revocation of my corporate access credentials, and a permanent stain on my elite employment record. Losing this battle would not just cost me my marital assets or my waterfront home. It would strip away my entire professional identity and my independent livelihood. Derek had already fractured my personal life through his deception. His mistress and his mother were now attempting to obliterate my capacity to generate wealth. They wanted me destitute, panicked, and willing to hand over the $1 million life insurance policy just to make the digital mob dissipate. I looked up from the tablet, meeting Victor's stern gaze. I refused to let my elite career become collateral damage for my deceased husband's infidelity. I did not plead for his understanding, nor did I offer a frantic emotional defense of my personal character. Pleading is a tactical error utilized by the powerless. I negotiated from a position of authority. I told Victor that offering a quick settlement would only signal guilt to the public, inviting further extortion down the line, and damaging the brand even more. I demanded exactly 5 days to clear my name. I promised him that by the end of the week, the situation would conclude with federal indictments for the opposition, resulting in a total vindication of my character and the firm's reputation. I looked him in the eye and guaranteed a structural collapse of their fraudulent narrative. Victor studied my face, weighing the operational risk against my historical performance record. He respected analytical certainty. He nodded once, granting the 96-hour window. The deadline was officially set. I turned and walked out of the glass suite, projecting a calm exterior while my mind raced through logistical probabilities. I returned to my desk, the physical sensation of the deadline pressing heavily against my chest. The pressure was suffocating. I sat down in my chair, my fingers hovering over the ergonomic keyboard. I had 4 days to dismantle a forged legal document, expose a highly concealed shell company, and destroy a viral smear campaign before I lost everything I had spent a decade building. I could not fight a digital mob with mere denials or public relations statements. I needed undeniable empirical data. I needed a fatal flaw in their foundational logic. Monica claimed the baby was the rightful heir to the estate, using the infant as a human shield to extract funds. To break her public narrative, I needed to prove the child was a mere prop in a larger financial scheme. I needed a baseline truth regarding Derek's physical reality. I opened a secure browser tab and navigated toward my premium corporate health insurance portal, preparing to audit 5 years of medical billing history to find the one biological anomaly that would blow their entire operation apart. I retreated to my home office, the weight of the corporate ultimatum pressing heavily on my shoulders. The glass walls of my superior's office were gone, replaced by the familiar glow of my dual monitors, but the deadline remained absolute. I had secured a 96-hour window to dismantle a coordinated smear campaign, a forged will, and a hidden corporate entity. My opponents believed they were battling a grieving widow, cornered by public outrage. They failed to realize they were engaged in a logistical war with an auditor who possessed unrestricted access to the foundational data of our shared life. I needed a baseline truth to unravel the intricate web of Derek's deception. Monica's entire legal strategy and public relations offensive relied on a single emotional premise. The 6-month-old infant was Derek's biological heir. It was the linchpin of her narrative, the justification for the forged will, and the engine driving the social media fury. If I could break that foundational claim, the rest of her fabricated reality would inevitably collapse. I bypassed the financial records and the real estate documents. Money can be moved, hidden, and laundered, but biological realities leave undeniable static footprints within the medical establishment. I logged into my premium corporate health insurance portal. The interface was sterile and efficient, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos raging outside my front door. I authenticated my credentials and navigated to the comprehensive billing history section. I initiated a deep dive, pulling Derek's complete medical records spanning our entire 5-year marriage. The screen populated with hundreds of line items: routine dental cleanings, annual physicals, urgent care visits for minor sports injuries, and finally, the catastrophic trauma charges from his fatal collision on Interstate 5. I filtered out the recent activity, setting the search parameters to isolate specialized outpatient procedures occurring before the current calendar year. I was not looking for a smoking gun. I was hunting for a specific vital pebble. I needed a medical anomaly that would completely shatter Monica's carefully constructed narrative. I meticulously scanned the digital archives, cross-referencing dates and provider codes. My eyes darted across the screen, analyzing the alphanumeric strings with the practiced precision of a supply chain director reviewing an inventory manifest. I found it, buried in an explanation of benefits statement generated exactly 4 years ago. It was a seemingly insignificant line item, a $50 specialist copay for an outpatient clinic located in downtown Seattle. The provider code indicated a urology specialist. My heart rate remained steady, but a cold, focused energy sharpened my concentration. I expanded the claim details, requesting the corresponding digital surgical notes and the physician's summary report. The server processed the request, the progress bar inching forward, pulling the archived data from the provider's secure network. The document rendered on my primary monitor, in stark black and white text, it was not a routine consultation or a minor diagnostic test. It was an operative report, detailing a voluntary, irreversible vasectomy. I leaned closer to the screen, reading the physician's clinical notes. The procedure was documented with clinical precision. The bilateral severing and cauterization were confirmed. The post-operative semen analysis conducted 12 weeks later verified a 0 sperm count. The medical conclusion was definitive. Derek Weaver was permanently sterile. I reached out and pressed the print command. The laser printer in the corner of my office whirred to life, producing the physical document. I picked up the warm sheet of paper. It felt heavy with undeniable vindication. This was my Chekhov's gun. It was a mundane accounting detail, a $50 copay hidden in years of medical billing, that possessed the devastating power to obliterate their entire foundational argument. Derek was sterile. The implication struck with the force of a physical blow. Yet, it provided a profound tactical clarity. Derek knew absolutely that he was incapable of fathering a child. He possessed the medical documentation proving his sterility. Therefore, he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that the 6-month-old baby Monica held in her arms was not biologically his. The infant was merely a prop. The entire narrative, the secret second family, the desperate rush to Bellevue, the tragic father cut down in his prime, was a complete fabrication. It was a meticulously crafted illusion designed to mask a much darker, far more dangerous reality. I stared at the printed explanation of benefits, the math rapidly reconfiguring in my mind. If Derek knew the child was not his, why would he forge a secondary will, redirecting his $1.5 million corporate life insurance policy to a trust established for that specific infant? Why would a notoriously frugal man who had spent years guarding our marital assets with aggressive scrutiny suddenly bestow a fortune and control of a mysterious LLC upon a woman carrying another man's baby? The forged will was not an act of misguided generosity. It was not a romantic gesture for a mistress. It was a legal firewall. Derek had weaponized the probate system to construct a barrier. He was not giving Monica a gift. He was assigning her a liability. He needed an untraceable beneficiary, an entity that could not be legally connected to his marital estate or my forensic oversight. He used the infant as a human shield, a sympathetic proxy to hold the assets and the corresponding risks. But what risk was so severe that it required such elaborate fraudulent measures? The $10,000 heavy-duty suspension upgrade on his sports car, the recurring wire transfers bleeding our savings into the Bellevue LLC, the sudden, uncharacteristic late-night shifts at the Everett Aerospace manufacturing plant. He was not funding a mistress's lifestyle. He was operating a shadow logistics network. The Bellevue LLC was not a legitimate business enterprise. It was a money laundering shell. The forged will was designed to ensure that when the illicit operation eventually collapsed, or if he met a sudden demise, the federal scrutiny would fall entirely upon Monica, and the infant's trust completely bypassing his legal wife and his primary estate. He had set Monica up to be the ultimate fall guy, and she, blinded by greed and the illusion of $1 million payout, was aggressively fighting to claim the very trap he had built for her. To prove this theory, to assemble the final pieces of the forensic puzzle, I needed access to the operational core of his deception. I needed the internal ledgers of the Bellevue LLC. The surface-level bank statements were insufficient. I needed to see the offshore routing numbers, the encrypted communications, and the origin point of the stolen capital. That data was locked inside Derek's heavily encrypted personal cloud drive. I pulled up the recovery portal on my secondary monitor. The encryption firewall required more than just a password reset. It demanded the answers to two specific, highly personal security questions established years before our marriage. I did not know the name of his childhood pet. I did not know the street he grew up on. My husband had built a digital fortress to protect his crimes, and I was locked on the outside. The 96-hour deadline ticked mercilessly in the back of my mind. The corporate ultimatum loomed large. I could not brute force the encryption in time. I needed the security answers immediately, and there was only one person in the world arrogant enough and greedy enough to hand them over without realizing she was handing me the key to her own destruction. I picked up my smartphone and prepared to initiate a social engineering hack on my mother-in-law. I stared at the warm printer paper in my hand. The black ink spelled out a biological reality that shattered the entire public narrative. Derek was sterile. He had been sterile for 4 years. The infant Monica held in the hospital lobby shared none of his DNA. As I absorbed the clinical notes detailing the bilateral severing, a chilling memory snapped into sharp focus, cutting through the silence of my home office. 3 years ago, on a rainy Sunday evening, I stood at our kitchen island reviewing our annual household budget. My practical sedan was nearing 100,000 miles, and I suggested upgrading to a midsize SUV. It was a logical capital expenditure for a married couple in their early 30s. Derek stood across the marble counter holding a glass of scotch. His posture immediately stiffened, the ice clinked against the crystal as he set his drink down with deliberate, heavy force. He did not just disagree with the vehicle upgrade. He attacked the underlying implication. An SUV implies passengers, he stated, his voice a tight, controlled hiss. It implies car seats and weekend soccer trips. We are not doing that, Christina. I reminded him that our combined incomes were more than sufficient to accommodate a growing family. He leaned over the island, his knuckles turning white against the dark stone. Children are parasitic liabilities that drain wealth, he declared, his eyes locked onto mine with unsettling intensity. They are unpredictable variables that consume resources and yield zero financial return. I am building a fortress, not a daycare. He then mandated that we divert an additional 15% of our monthly income into high-yield index funds, prioritizing asset accumulation over any domestic expansion. That memory hovered in my mind, casting a harsh light on the events of the past week. The man who viewed human life strictly through the lens of profit and loss would never experience a sudden, secret devotion to a crying infant. He despised unpredictable variables. A mistress demanding a Bellevue condo and a baby requiring constant financial upkeep violated every core principle of his obsessive wealth management. Therefore, the child was not a romantic legacy. The infant was a tool. I looked back at the digital trail on my monitors. The pieces of the puzzle began to interlock with terrifying precision. If the baby was not his, why did he forge a secondary will establishing $1 million trust for a stranger's infant? Why would a notoriously frugal man redirect his substantial aerospace life insurance policy away from his legal spouse? The answer lay hidden within the operational structure of the Bellevue Shell Company. Derek was not funding a lavish lifestyle for a secret lover. He was paying for a laundering proxy. In global supply chains, when a rogue actor wants to move illicit cargo, they never use their own name. They create a dummy corporation, install a figurehead, and route the funds through untraceable channels. Derek applied this exact criminal methodology to his personal life. He needed a clean identity to open offshore bank accounts and register the corporate shell. He needed an entity disconnected from his marital estate to shield his activities from my professional scrutiny. Monica was not a pampered paramour. She was a coerced pawn or a willing co-conspirator. Derek likely bribed her, leveraging her desperate financial situation to gain access to the one asset he truly required: her baby's pristine, unblemished Social Security number. A newborn child possesses zero credit history, zero tax liabilities, and zero digital footprint. For a man constructing a shadow economy, that 9-digit number was a blank canvas. He used the infant's identity to establish the fraudulent corporate trusts, transforming the baby into a living, breathing federal tax shield. By placing the Bellevue operation in Monica's name and tying the financial trust to the infant Derek created, a brilliant legal firewall. The forged will was the final failsafe. He ensured that any future federal audits tracing the diverted funds would bypass his primary estate. He isolated the legal risk, placing the crosshairs firmly on Monica and her infant. Monica believed she had secured a wealthy benefactor and a massive inheritance. She was currently weaponizing social media, painting me as a villain to expedite the transfer of those assets. She did not realize that Derek had engineered a trap. By demanding the estate, Monica was eagerly volunteering to absorb the full weight of a severe federal crime. To present this theory to the authorities and clear my name before the corporate deadline expired, I needed empirical proof. Suppositions and medical receipts would not satisfy the vice president of auditing, nor would they silence the raging digital mob. I needed the internal accounting ledgers of the Bellevue operation. I needed the encrypted communications between Derek and Monica. I needed to track the exact origin point of the stolen capital. All of that data resided within Derek's heavily secured personal cloud drive. I swiveled my chair toward the secondary monitor and accessed the cloud provider's login portal. I entered his known email address and clicked the password recovery prompt. The screen shifted, loading the two-step verification process. The system bypassed his deactivated phone number and generated 2 security questions. Question 1. What was the name of your first childhood pet? Question 2. What was the name of the street you grew up on? A cold wave of frustration washed over me. During our courtship and marriage, Derek rarely spoke of his childhood. He treated his past as a closed file, dismissing any inquiries with vague answers. He had intentionally kept those biographical details hidden, knowing they served as the master keys to his digital fortress. I had less than 80 hours until the corporate suspension took effect. I did not possess the technical hacking skills to breach an enterprise-grade encryption firewall. The digital barricade was impenetrable from the outside. I needed the answers, and they existed in only one place. I needed to extract the exact childhood data from the woman who had raised him. I reached for my smartphone, my thumb hovering over the contact list. The viral GoFundMe campaign continued to gather hostile donations, each notification a ticking clock against my career. I had to initiate a highly calculated social engineering maneuver on Valerie. I had to manipulate a woman who currently despised me, tricking her into handing over the keys to her son's hidden empire, all without alerting her to my true intentions. The glow of the dual monitors cast long, harsh shadows across my home office. The recovery portal blinked on the screen, a digital padlock guarding the core of Derek's deception. The 2 security questions stared back at me, demanding biographical details my husband had spent 5 years deliberately withholding. I did not have the luxury of time to guess. The corporate suspension loomed 48 hours away. I needed the keys, and I needed them now. I picked up my smartphone and scrolled through the contacts until I reached Valerie's name. My heart rate remained steady, but I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I needed to construct an audio illusion. I needed to present a version of myself that Valerie expected to see, a broken, panicked widow crumbling under the weight of public humiliation and financial ruin. I tapped the call button. The line rang twice before she answered. "Yes," Valerie said. Her tone was sharp, clipped, and dripping with condescending triumph. She answered the phone, assuming I was calling to wave a white flag, ready to negotiate a surrender to stop the viral bleeding online. I let out a shaky, manufactured sob, leaning close to the microphone. "Valerie," I gasped, my voice trembling with practiced desperation. "I do not know what to do. Everything is falling apart." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a dark, satisfied chuckle. "I told you, Christina, you cannot fight this. The public sees exactly who you are. Surrender the estate, and we might tell Monica to take down the campaign." I ignored her taunt, maintaining the fragile facade. "It is not the campaign, Valerie. It is the life insurance policy, the payout." The mention of the $1.5 million sum instantly altered the dynamic of the call. Her triumphant sneer evaporated, replaced by sudden, intense focus. "What about the policy?" she demanded. I sobbed again, louder this time. "I am trying to process the transfer to the baby's trust, just like Monica asked, but I am locked out of the primary estate portal. The insurance underwriters flagged the account due to the sudden changes in the secondary will." Valerie's voice tightened with immediate panic. "Flagged it? What does that mean?" "It means they are freezing the payout," I cried, injecting pure terror into my tone. "They will not release the funds to Monica unless I can verify Derek's core identity profile to clear the security hold. If I cannot unlock the portal today, the entire policy goes into state probate. It could take years to untangle. The baby will get nothing until the courts figure it out." The threat of losing the immediate cash payout struck Valerie like a physical blow. Her greed instantly overrode her malice. The prospect of her coveted grandson being denied his rightful fortune sent her into a frantic spiral. She could not afford a lengthy probate battle, nor could Monica. They needed the liquid capital now to sustain the illusion of their newfound wealth. "What do you need?" Valerie snapped, her voice frantic, the power dynamic entirely inverted without her realizing it. "Tell me what they are asking for." I looked at the glowing recovery screen on my monitor. "They need the answers to his original security questions," I stammered, portraying overwhelming confusion. "I do not know them, Valerie. He never told me." "Read the questions to me right now," she commanded. I took a shaky breath. "What was the name of his first childhood pet?" "It was a beagle," Valerie answered immediately, her words spilling out in a rush. "Named Buster. We got him when Derek was 7. What is the next one?" I typed the word Buster into the first text field on the screen. "What was the name of the street he grew up on?" I asked. "Maplewood," she barked. "Maplewood Drive. Enter it right now, Christina. You clear that hold and you process that transfer today, or I swear I will make your life a living hell." I typed Maplewood into the second field. I hit the Enter key. The loading icon spun for a fraction of a second. The red warning text disappeared. The encryption firewall dropped, granting me full administrative access to the hidden drive. I was in. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the end call button. The manufactured tears vanished instantly, replaced by cold, calculating efficiency. I had successfully social engineered the gatekeeper, extracting the exact data required to breach the fortress. The screen populated with a sprawling directory of nested folders. I began downloading the entire archive to a secure external drive, securing the raw data, before anyone could realize the perimeter had been compromised. As the progress bar crept forward, I opened the primary financial ledger. The spreadsheets were massive, containing thousands of line items documenting off-book transactions, encrypted wire transfers, and offshore routing numbers. The sheer volume of the data was staggering. The supply chain of Derek's hidden life was finally laid bare. I cross-referenced the dates of the offshore transfers with his corporate calendar. The correlation was flawless. The massive influxes of capital into the Bellevue LLC coincided exactly with significant inventory discrepancies reported at the Everett Aerospace plant. Derek was not just skimming petty cash, he was operating a sophisticated logistical theft ring. I opened a folder labeled Inventory Disposals. It contained dozens of forged shipping manifests and falsified destruction certificates for high-grade, classified aerospace components. These were specialized parts designed for commercial jetliners, possessing immense value on the black market. He had been secretly transporting the heavy stolen parts in his sports car, explaining the absurd $10,000 suspension upgrade. He moved the hardware off-site, liquidated the assets through illicit buyers, and funneled the dirty cash through Monica's Bellevue LLC to wash the money clean. The baby was never a legacy. The infant was a pristine, untraceable Social Security number utilized to establish the fraudulent corporate trusts and open the offshore accounts. The forged will was the ultimate legal firewall, designed to ensure that if the operation collapsed, the federal scrutiny would fall entirely upon Monica and the child, bypassing his primary estate. He had engineered a multi-million-dollar federal crime and positioned his mistress to take the fall. I continued sifting through the downloaded data, searching for the catalyst of his final fatal drive. I found it, buried in his corporate email logs. 20 minutes before the fatal crash on Interstate 5, Derek received an automated high-priority alert from the Everett plant's internal security system. An unannounced comprehensive inventory audit had been declared for his specific manufacturing sector. The timeline crystallized. Derek was not speeding to Bellevue for a romantic rendezvous. He was in a blind panic. He knew the internal audit would immediately expose the missing components. He was fleeing down the highway at 100 miles an hour to reach the Bellevue condo, desperate to destroy the physical ledgers and scrub the digital drives before the federal investigators caught on. His death wasn't a tragic accident born of forbidden love. It was a chaotic casualty of federal wire fraud. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the full scope of the operation mapped out before me. I possessed the entire forensic blueprint of the crime. I had the medical receipts proving the vasectomy, the bank statements detailing the laundering, and the forged manifests proving the theft. I had everything required to clear my name, dismantle the GoFundMe campaign, and secure my corporate career. But I could not simply hand this dossier over to my vice president. Submitting evidence of massive federal fraud to an e-commerce executive would not solve the immediate problem of the probate court. Monica and Valerie were still aggressively pursuing the $1.5 million life insurance policy, and they were preparing a physical assault to force my compliance. The digital perimeter was secure, but the physical threat was escalating. My smartphone chimed with a new notification. It was a calendar alert, reminding me of a mandatory in-person compliance briefing at the corporate headquarters the following afternoon. I knew Valerie and her sister-in-law Lauren were impatient. The viral campaign was generating heat, but it had not yet produced the immediate cash payout they demanded. They were desperate, and desperate actors inevitably escalate to physical confrontation. I began compiling the raw data into a structured, undeniable forensic dossier. I organized the offshore routing numbers, the falsified supply chain invoices, and the medical records into a coherent narrative of fraud. I needed to prepare for the inevitable ambush. They would not wait for the probate hearing. They would attempt to corner me in a public space, utilizing the threat of the fabricated homicide investigation to extort my signature. I reached into my desk drawer and retrieved a high-definition smartwatch, securing it around my wrist. I synced the device to a secure cloud server, ensuring the audio recording function was active and ready to deploy at a moment's notice. The trap was fully armed. I had the data, I had the recording device. Now I just needed the adversaries to step into the kill zone. The digital extraction completed with a soft chime. The progress bar vanished, leaving behind a sprawling directory of decrypted folders on my secondary monitor. I sat in the dim light of my home office, the blue glow reflecting off my irises. The sheer volume of data Derek had hidden behind a dead childhood pet and a suburban street name was staggering. I created a fresh, isolated workspace on my hard drive and began importing the raw ledgers. In supply chain auditing, you do not look at the narrative first. You look at the flow of physical goods. I opened a folder labeled with obscure alphanumeric strings. Inside lay hundreds of PDF documents. They were internal inventory manifests from the Everett Aerospace plant where my husband spent his days. The facility manufactured specialized components for commercial jetliners. I cross-referenced the part numbers on his saved manifests with the plant's public supplier index. The items were not cheap brackets or standard bolts. They were high-grade titanium alloy turbine blades, advanced gyroscopic sensors, and proprietary navigation circuitry. I ran a quick calculation on a digital spreadsheet, summing the wholesale value of the diverted inventory over an 18-month period. The final cell populated with a number that forced me to pause my breathing. $4 million. Derek had siphoned $4 million in raw, restricted aerospace materials from his employer. He was not skimming petty cash from a corporate expense account. He was operating a sophisticated logistical theft ring right under the noses of federal contractors. But abstract numbers on a screen require physical movement in the real world. You cannot email a titanium turbine blade. Someone has to carry it out of the warehouse. I pulled up the digitized receipt for the $10,000 custom automotive work he commissioned 3 weeks ago. The reinforced coilover system finally made perfect sense. Aerospace components are incredibly dense. If a mid-level manager attempts to smuggle 200 pounds of industrial metal in the trunk of a standard luxury sedan, the rear chassis will sag noticeably. The tires will rub against the wheel wells. Security guards at the exit gates notice sagging vehicles. Derek upgraded his sports car with a heavy-duty payload suspension to keep the vehicle perfectly level while hauling immense weight. He transformed his commuter car into a high-speed smuggling vessel. The next phase of the audit required tracking the liquid capital. Stolen jet parts hold zero value unless you possess a network willing to purchase them. Derek liquidated the hardware through gray market buyers, generating a tidal wave of illicit cash. That dirty money needed a filtration system to enter the legitimate banking sector without triggering federal reporting alerts. Enter the Bellevue LLC. I opened the financial directories tied to the shell company. Monica was listed as the sole proprietor, but the operating agreement was structured using her infant son's pristine Social Security number as the primary beneficiary shield. Derek generated fictitious consulting invoices, billing the LLC for non-existent logistical advisory services. He deposited the black market cash into the Bellevue accounts, then wired the washed funds back into his own hidden offshore portfolios. Monica believed she was a cherished partner, being gifted a luxury condo and a trust fund. In reality, she was the designated fall guy. If the federal authorities ever detected the anomaly in the Everett plant's inventory, they would follow the money directly to Bellevue. They would find a young mother and an infant holding the bag for a $4 million federal felony. Derek had engineered the perfect escape hatch, and he used a child's identity to forge the lock. The sheer calculation of his betrayal eclipsed any lingering grief. My husband was a stranger. a corporate parasite who viewed every human connection as a tactical advantage. Yet one glaring inconsistency remained. The timeline of his fatal crash did not align with a man confidently executing a flawless crime. A successful embezzler does not hydroplane into a concrete barrier at 100 miles an hour, unless a catalyst disrupts his control. I accessed his archived corporate email logs, sorting the inbox by chronological order on the day he died. I scrolled down to the afternoon hours, tracing his final digital footprints. At 1:15 in the afternoon, he was approving routine vacation requests for his subordinates. At 1:30, he ordered lunch from a nearby deli. Then, at 2:14, a high-priority alert dropped into his inbox from the Everett plant's internal security director. The email mandated an immediate, unannounced inventory audit for Sector 4. Sector 4 was Derek's primary management zone. I pulled up the facility's localized access logs tracking his employee badge swipes. 3 minutes after the surprise audit notification, arrived Derek's badge registered at the executive parking garage exit. He did not log out of his workstation. He did not grab his suit jacket. He abandoned his post and fled. To corroborate the narrative, I extracted the telematics data downloaded from his destroyed vehicle's onboard computer. The GPS coordinates painted a vivid picture of escalating panic. He exited the Everett facility and merged onto Interstate 5 South, accelerating far beyond the legal limits. The tires lost traction in the relentless Washington rain, the telemetry recording erratic braking patterns and dangerous lane changes. The destination plugged into his navigation system was not a romantic rendezvous spot. It was the Bellevue condo. Derek knew the surprise audit would immediately expose the missing titanium components. The digital paper trail was too vast to hide from a dedicated internal review. He was in a blind panic, fleeing down the highway in a desperate bid to reach the shell company's headquarters. He needed to shred the physical ledgers, wipe the local hard drives, and silence Monica before the federal investigators connected the dots. His death was not a tragic accident born of a man rushing to start a new life with his true love. It was a chaotic casualty of wire fraud. He died terrified, knowing the walls of his shadow empire were collapsing inward. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the hum of the hard drive the only sound in the quiet house. I possessed the entire forensic blueprint of the crime. I had the medical receipts proving the vasectomy, the bank statements detailing the laundering, the forged manifests proving the theft, and the telematics confirming his flight. I began compiling every byte of data into a structured, undeniable forensic dossier. I created encrypted subfolders categorizing the evidence by chronological order and legal relevance. I drafted a comprehensive executive summary outlining the precise methodology of his embezzlement and the fraudulent nature of the secondary will. This dossier was my shield and my sword. It contained the power to clear my name, dismantle the viral smear campaign, and secure my corporate career. However, submitting this evidence to my e-commerce employer would not solve the immediate physical threat. The vice president of auditing cared about public relations, not probate law. Monica and Valerie were still relentlessly pursuing the $1.5 million life insurance payout. The viral social media campaign was continuing to stoke public outrage, fueling their impatience. They wanted the liquid capital, and they wanted it before the courts could intervene. Desperate actors inevitably escalate their tactics when their demands are delayed. My smartphone vibrated against the glass desk, pulling my attention away from the compiled dossier. A calendar alert flashed across the screen, reminding me of a mandatory compliance briefing scheduled at the corporate headquarters the following afternoon. I stared at the notification, anticipating their next maneuver. Valerie and her sister-in-law Lauren would not wait for a formal legal proceeding. They were emboldened by the digital mob and desperate for the payout. They would attempt to corner me in a public space, utilizing the threat of a fabricated homicide investigation to extort my signature on the life insurance release forms. The digital perimeter was secure. The truth was locked in my hard drive. Now I needed to prepare for a physical ambush. I needed to ensure that when they finally stepped into the light to deliver their threats, they would leave an undeniable recorded confession in their wake. The morning of the compliance briefing arrived draped in a dense, suffocating fog, typical of a Seattle autumn. The relentless drizzle coated the windshield of my sedan as I navigated the slow crawl of traffic across the floating bridge. My mind remained entirely compartmentalized, insulated from the emotional turbulence that most widows experience. I parked in the subterranean garage of my corporate headquarters. I stepped out of the vehicle, wearing a tailored charcoal suit paired with sensible leather pumps. This was not attire curated for a period of mourning. It was specialized armor designed for a corporate executive facing a hostile extraction. Before leaving my Kirkland house, I had fastened a high-definition smartwatch around my left wrist. I spent 10 minutes configuring the device, syncing the discrete audio recording application directly to an encrypted cloud server. Data preservation forms the foundation of any successful audit. If the hardware was compromised, the digital evidence would survive. The lobby of the global e-commerce giant spanned an entire city block, serving as a monument to retail efficiency. It featured towering columns of polished steel and sprawling acoustic glass panels designed to minimize the echo of thousands of rushing footsteps. A rigid perimeter of biometric security turnstiles separated the public atrium from the private executive elevators. Employees milled about, holding premium espresso cups, scanning their retinas to enter the sanctuary of productivity. The atmosphere buzzed with the quiet hum of commerce. I maintained a steady, measured stride as I approached the security checkpoint, my leather briefcase gripping the physical copies of the forensic dossier. I was prepared to present my findings to the Vice President of Auditing, ready to neutralize the internal threat to my career. Before I could reach the scanners, two figures detached themselves from the shadow of a towering indoor water feature. They did not belong in this streamlined ecosystem of tech professionals. Valerie wore a bright floral trench coat paired with a designer silk scarf, an ensemble curated for a country club luncheon rather than a Tuesday morning corporate infiltration. Lauren stood close beside her, mirroring her mother's entitled posture. Lauren was a woman who subsisted entirely on generational wealth and sheer audacity, having never navigated a professional environment. They positioned themselves strategically, blocking the narrow pathway leading to the biometric gates. Valerie crossed her arms. Her eyes gleamed with a predatory, impatient hunger. The viral social media campaign had emboldened her, inflating her confidence to dangerous levels. She assumed the relentless digital outrage had fractured my defenses, rendering me fragile and desperate to avoid any further public humiliation. She stepped directly into my personal space, forcing me to halt my progression or risk a physical collision. Lauren flanked my right side, effectively cutting off any lateral escape route. "You are out of time," Christina Valerie stated, in a harsh whisper. Her voice was pitched low, but the venom dripped from every deliberate syllable. "The fundraising campaign is breaking records. The whole city knows what kind of monster you are. Your executive board is watching your every move." I kept my facial muscles relaxed, betraying zero emotion. My pulse maintained a steady, resting rhythm of 60 beats per minute. I did not shrink back from her hostility. I simply looked down at her, maintaining unbroken eye contact. "State your business, Valerie. I have a compliance briefing in 4 minutes." Valerie sneered, misinterpreting my calm exterior for paralyzed shock. She reached into her oversized leather handbag and withdrew a thick stack of legal documents. It was a formal relinquishment of the $1.5 million life insurance policy, drafted to transfer the funds directly to the infant's trust. "You are going to sign this release right now," Valerie demanded. She shoved the paperwork forcefully toward my chest, expecting me to catch it. "You are going to surrender the payout to my grandson, and you are going to drop your objection to the secondary will." I let the documents fall to the polished granite floor. The heavy thud of the thick paper drew the attention of several passing financial analysts, who quickly averted their eyes, eager to avoid workplace drama. I am not signing anything I stated. My tone was flat and uncompromising, stripping the emotion from the interaction. The probate hearing is tomorrow morning. We will address the estate transfer before a judge. Valerie's face flushed a deep mottled crimson. The rejection fractured her composed facade. She leaned in closer, invading my space. The scent of her heavy floral perfume masked the metallic smell of the surrounding architecture. If you drag us into probate court tomorrow, I will ruin you permanently, she whispered. Her words were laced with pure, desperate malice. I will personally walk into the Seattle police precinct. I will tell the detectives that Derek confided in me. I will tell them you were furious about our marital problems and that you tampered with the brake lines on his sports car the night before he crashed. Lauren stepped forward, a cruel, satisfied smile stretching across her face. And I will corroborate every single word Lauren added. Her voice dripped with venomous anticipation. I will testify under oath that I saw you in the garage holding tools. A scorned, barren wife executing a fatal sabotage. It fits the public narrative perfectly. The internet already hates you. The police will arrest you by sunset. You will face a homicide investigation, Christina. They expected me to crumble. They anticipated a display of trembling terror, a frantic plea for mercy to avoid a fabricated murder charge. In their minds, a corporate auditor possessed no defense against street-level blackmail. They believed the threat of prison would override my financial logic, forcing an immediate, unconditional surrender of the $1 million payout. They failed to understand the fundamental laws of risk management. When an adversary introduces a catastrophic threat, you do not argue the validity of the claim. You document the interaction. I did not gasp. I did not deny their ridiculous fabrication. I slowly raised my left arm, feigning a casual glance at the time. With a deliberate, microscopic movement of my index finger, I tapped the digital crown of my smartwatch twice. A tiny haptic pulse vibrated against my wrist. The high-definition audio file ceased recording and uploaded the encrypted data packet directly to my remote server. I had just captured 2 minutes and 40 seconds of crisp, undeniable felony extortion. I lowered my arm and met Valerie's furious gaze. My eyes were hollow, reflecting nothing but calculated efficiency. I felt no anger, only the profound satisfaction of an investigator locating the final, fatal discrepancy in a fraudulent ledger. You are threatening to fabricate a homicide charge to secure a financial asset, I stated. My voice echoed slightly in the cavernous lobby, ensuring the specific legal terminology lingered in the air. That is a fascinating negotiation tactic. Valerie blinked, momentarily disoriented by my complete lack of panic. She opened her mouth to reiterate the threat, struggling to regain control of the narrative. I stepped forward, forcing her to stumble backward to maintain her balance. Bring your lawyer to probate court tomorrow morning, Valerie, I commanded. My voice sliced through her remaining confidence like a scalpel. We will settle everything on the public record. I did not wait for a response. I stepped over the scattered legal documents on the granite floor. I scanned my biometric badge at the security turnstile, the digital chime granting me access to the secure zone. I walked toward the waiting elevators without looking back. Through the transparent glass of the security gates, I watched them scramble to gather the dropped paperwork. Their expressions twisted into confused frustration, their leverage rapidly evaporating. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought the ambush was a masterful display of intimidation. They had no idea they had just handed me the precise leverage required to orchestrate their total destruction. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing me inside a quiet, ascending steel box, I pulled out my smartphone and dialed my attorney. The defensive phase of this operation was officially over. The data collection was complete. It was time to formulate the offensive strategy and finalize the trap. The elevator ascended silently to the 42nd floor of a premier downtown Seattle high-rise. I stepped out into a reception area paneled in rich walnut and brushed steel. Rain beat steadily against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the panoramic view of the Puget Sound. Nathaniel Reed was a veteran probate litigator. He built his prestigious reputation untangling the messy estates of Pacific Northwest tech billionaires and commercial real estate developers. He was thoroughly accustomed to dealing with weeping spouses, bitter heirs, and frantic paramours. When I sat down in the leather chair opposite his sprawling mahogany desk, he offered a sympathetic nod, expecting tears. I bypassed the emotional pleasantries. I opened my briefcase and offered him a specialized flash drive. I placed the encrypted storage device on the polished wood. Next to it, I set my smartphone, queuing up the audio file extracted from my watch. Finally, I laid down the physical printout of the medical explanation of benefits. Nathaniel frowned, adjusting his silver-framed glasses. He picked up the medical receipt first. I watched his eyes scan the clinical text, detailing the vasectomy procedure from 4 years ago. The ambient noise in the office seemed to vanish. He looked up, the professional sympathy draining from his features replaced by sharp, focused confusion. I instructed him to plug the flash drive into his secure terminal. Nathaniel complied, typing in his decryption credentials. The wide monitor populated with sprawling financial ledgers, falsified aerospace inventory manifests, and offshore routing numbers tied to the Bellevue Shell Company. I walked him through the timeline. I detailed the $4 million in stolen commercial jetliner components. I showed him the forged shipping records and the corresponding gray market deposits. I laid bare the entire logistical supply chain of my deceased husband's federal wire fraud operation. Then I pressed play on my smartphone. Valerie's shrill, panicked voice filled the quiet office. Her threats echoed off the thick acoustic glass walls. She explicitly promised to fabricate a homicide investigation, detailing her specific plan to accuse me of tampering with brake lines unless I surrendered the life insurance payout. Lauren chimed in, eager to corroborate the perjury. Nathaniel sat frozen in his high-backed ergonomic chair. He had spent 3 decades navigating complex litigation, but the sheer density of the felonies sitting on his desk left him momentarily speechless. He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We can destroy them," Nathaniel finally said. His voice dropped to a harsh, serious register. He leaned forward, tapping a gold pen against his yellow legal pad. "I will draft an immediate objection to Monica's claims today. We will challenge the forged signature on the secondary will with a forensic handwriting expert. I will submit this audio recording to the Seattle Police Department for felony extortion. We will petition the judge to freeze every single asset bearing your husband's name. They want to fight? We will give them a brutal courtroom bloodbath." "No," I commanded. My tone carried the distinct, unwavering authority of a supply chain director halting a flawed assembly line. Nathaniel stopped tapping his pen. He stared at me, unaccustomed to clients rejecting a guaranteed legal victory. I leaned closer to the desk, steepling my fingers. In global logistics, when a hostile competitor demands control of a toxic asset, you do not waste resources fighting to retain it. You optimize the transfer. You step aside and let them absorb the liability. Nathaniel blinked, his seasoned legal mind racing to catch up with my corporate logic. I pointed toward the monitor, displaying the offshore bank routing numbers. "Derek constructed that shell company to launder stolen aerospace parts," I explained. "He utilized the infant's pristine social security number to open the accounts, creating a legal firewall. He forged that secondary will for one specific reason. He wanted to ensure that if his operation collapsed, the federal investigators would follow the money directly to his mistress and her child, bypassing my forensic oversight. If we challenge the forged will in probate court tomorrow, I continued, we tie ourselves to the estate. We force the judge to keep the assets frozen. Under my purview, when the federal agents inevitably discover the missing titanium components, they will trace the funds to an estate that I am actively fighting to control. That makes me a person of interest. It entangles my personal wealth and my elite career in a lengthy, devastating federal inquiry. I refuse to let his crimes contaminate my ledger. My employer gave me a strict deadline to clear my name. A drawn-out probate battle guarantees my suspension. Nathaniel stared at the screen, a slow realization dawning on his face. You want to give it to them, he whispered. The magnitude of the trap began sinking in. I nodded. We are not going to fight the forged will. We are going to explicitly validate it on the public record. We will stand before the judge tomorrow morning and formally concede. We will legally bind Monica to the Bellevue Shell Company and the baby's trust, ensuring she becomes the sole, undisputed inheritor of the entire operation. By executing this maneuver, I would legally sever my name from every hidden account, every falsified manifest, and every stolen dollar, just hours before the hammer fell. Nathaniel picked up his pen, a fierce, predatory smile spreading across his face. He understood the assignment perfectly. He began drafting the concession documents, crafting specific language that would irrevocably transfer all ownership rights and, consequently, all legal liabilities directly into Monica's eager hands. We spent the next 3 hours finalizing the paperwork, ensuring the trap possessed no exit clauses or loopholes. Once the judge strikes the gavel confirming Monica as the sole beneficiary, what is your next move? Nathaniel asked. Printing the final drafts on crisp legal paper? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a secondary encrypted hard drive containing the comprehensive forensic dossier. I will walk out of the courtroom, I replied, and I will hand-deliver this drive to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They will have a neatly packaged, fully documented case of interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate embezzlement. And Monica will be holding the smoking gun, Nathaniel concluded, sliding the concession papers into a pristine manila folder. I gathered my belongings, the weight of the past week finally beginning to lift from my shoulders. I descended the elevator to the rainy Seattle streets. The drive back to Kirkland felt entirely different. The suffocating anxiety of the looming corporate deadline vanished, replaced by the cold, steady anticipation of an impending execution. I packed a single structured bag that evening, laying out a sharp navy suit for the morning proceedings. The trap was baited with the alluring promise of a $1.5 million payout. Valerie Lauren and Monica believed they had cornered a terrified widow. They thought their public smear campaign and their lobby extortion had successfully broken my spirit. They were sleeping soundly, dreaming of unearned wealth and a luxurious future. They failed to realize that justice is rarely an emotional outburst. True justice is a perfectly balanced equation. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning. Tomorrow, I would walk into the King County Courthouse, look the judge in the eye, and hand my enemies the exact rope they demanded. What happens next would require precise timing, leaving no room for error. The architecture of the King County Courthouse projects an atmosphere of unyielding authority. Built from heavy stone and polished marble, the sprawling complex in downtown Seattle is designed to make individuals feel small against the sheer weight of the judicial system. Thursday morning arrived, shrouded in the typical Pacific Northwest gloom. I navigated the metal detectors with a calm, deliberate efficiency, my briefcase resting securely in my grip. I wore the sharp navy suit I had laid out the night before, a sartorial choice that conveyed respect for the court while maintaining the austere presentation of a corporate executive. My attorney, Nathaniel, met me near the elevators. He carried a pristine manila folder containing the concession documents we had drafted the previous afternoon. We did not exchange pleasantries. We simply exchanged a look of mutual readiness. We were walking into a room filled with adversaries who believed they had already secured their victory. We were walking in to hand them the crown they so desperately coveted. We entered the assigned courtroom 10 minutes before the scheduled docket. The air inside felt heavy, suffocatingly tense. The mahogany benches were mostly empty save for a few court reporters and law clerks shuffling paperwork. However, the plaintiff's table was fully occupied. Monica sat rigidly in her chair, holding the infant against her chest. She was playing the role of the weeping, destitute mother to absolute perfection. She wore a modest, dark dress, a stark departure from the expensive boutique jacket she had paraded in the hospital lobby. The baby, likely unsettled by the unfamiliar environment, let out intermittent, fussy cries. It was a masterful display of manufactured vulnerability. Directly behind Monica, occupying the first row of the public gallery, sat my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Valerie had abandoned the floral trench coat for a severe dark skirt suit, attempting to project maternal gravity. Lauren sat beside her, constantly checking her smartphone, likely monitoring the engagement metrics of their viral GoFundMe campaign. When they registered my arrival, their posture shifted immediately. Valerie lifted her chin, shooting me a look of pure, venomous triumph. Lauren smirked a cruel twist of her lips that conveyed her absolute certainty in my impending financial ruin. They believed their lobby extortion had successfully broken my spirit. They were convinced that the threat of a fabricated homicide investigation had terrified me into silent submission. I took my seat at the defense table, placing my briefcase squarely in front of me. I did not look back at them. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, staring at the empty judicial bench. In supply chain optimization, when you are executing a critical systemic shift, you do not let the surrounding noise distract you from the primary objective. The heavy wooden door behind the bench swung open, and the bailiff called the courtroom to order. The judge, an older man with a reputation for sharp efficiency, took his seat. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the preliminary briefs on his monitor. He looked over the rim of his spectacles, observing the contrasting dynamics at the two tables. He noted the crying infant and the somber presentation of the plaintiff, then shifted his gaze to my stoic, unyielding posture. The viral social media narrative had undoubtedly permeated the courthouse gossip network. The judge, while sworn to impartiality, was still human. The optics heavily favored a struggling young mother over a polished corporate executive. Monica's high-priced attorney, a man known for aggressive litigation tactics in wealthy tech circles, wasted no time. He stood up, adjusting his silk tie, and immediately launched his offensive. He did not merely request a standard review of the estate. He petitioned the judge for an emergency injunction. He painted a picture of dire financial instability, claiming his client and her innocent child were on the brink of destitution. He dramatically presented the notarized secondary will, waving the document as if it were an undeniable mandate from the deceased. He demanded a total immediate freeze on all my marital assets. He requested that the court compel me to release the $1.5 million aerospace corporate life insurance payout directly into the baby's trust without delay. He argued that any delay would cause irreparable harm to the infant, framing my potential objections as a malicious attempt to starve a fatherless child. He leaned heavily on the emotional weight of the situation, utilizing the crying baby as his primary exhibit. The judge listened intently, his expression serious. He looked down at the secondary will entered into evidence, then shifted his gaze toward my legal counsel. The atmosphere in the courtroom tightened. The plaintiff's attorney sat down, a look of profound satisfaction settling across his features. Valerie leaned forward in the gallery, her hands gripping the wooden railing, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. They were waiting for the desperate, frantic objection. They were expecting my lawyer to launch a fiery defense to challenge the signature, to fight tooth and nail for the $1 million payout. They anticipated a brutal, drawn-out legal skirmish that would tie up the assets for months. Nathaniel stood up, slowly smoothing the front of his jacket. He picked up the manila folder from our table. He did not raise his voice. He did not adopt an aggressive posture. He simply smiled a polite, disarming expression that sent a ripple of confusion across the plaintiff's table. "Your Honor," Nathaniel began, his voice calm and resonant, carrying clearly across the quiet courtroom. "The defense has reviewed the petition submitted by opposing counsel." The judge narrowed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable counterattack. "Go on, counselor." Nathaniel opened the folder. "My client does not object to the emergency injunction," he stated. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. The court reporter's fingers paused over her steno machine. The judge leaned forward, his brow furrowed in stark disbelief. Monica stopped bouncing the baby, her mouth falling open slightly. Valerie and Lauren froze in the gallery, their triumphant sneers suddenly paralyzed by confusion. In fact, Nathaniel continued pacing his delivery for maximum impact. "We fully concede the validity of the secondary will presented today. We do not challenge the signature, nor do we dispute the intent of the testator. We entirely agree that Monica and the infant's trust are the sole rightful legal heirs to Derek Weaver's independent estate. Furthermore, we concede that they are the sole inheritors and managing operators of the Bellevue Limited Liability Company referenced in the documentation." A sharp, collective intake of breath echoed from the gallery. Monica let out an audible gasp of pure, unfiltered delight. She looked at her attorney, her eyes wide with shock and sudden, overwhelming victory. Valerie actually clapped her hands together, a sharp, inappropriate sound that cut through the judicial decorum. They had won! The battle they had prepared for, the extortion they had risked, the public humiliation they had orchestrated had all culminated in an immediate, unconditional surrender. They thought they had utterly destroyed me. They believed I had crumbled under the pressure, terrified of the fabricated murder charges, willing to hand over a fortune just to escape their wrath. The judge stared at Nathaniel, clearly unsettled by the rapid capitulation. "Counselor, are you stating for the record that your client is voluntarily relinquishing all claims to the $1.5 million policy and the associated corporate entity?" "Yes, Your Honor," Nathaniel affirmed, stepping forward to submit the formal concession documents. "We are executing a total and irrevocable transfer of those specific assets, validating the secondary will entirely. We ask the court to formalize this transfer immediately, granting the plaintiff full control and ownership of the estate and the Bellevue Company as requested." The judge reviewed the paperwork, shaking his head slightly at the highly unusual legal maneuver. He looked at me, verifying my consent. I maintained a calm, steady nod. He picked up his gavel, ready to strike the wood and make the transfer legally binding. Monica was practically vibrating with excitement, bouncing the infant on her knee, visualizing the massive influx of wealth. Valerie leaned back in the gallery bench, a look of profound, arrogant satisfaction settling over her face. They were seconds away from securing the empire they had fought so viciously to steal. They were completely unaware that the empire was built on a foundation of federal wire fraud, and that the crown they were about to accept was actually a pair of federal handcuffs. The judge raised the gavel. The transfer was about to be finalized. The defensive phase was complete. I reached down and rested my hand on the heavy leather briefcase sitting at my feet, ready to initiate the final, devastating sequence of the audit. The polished wooden gavel hung suspended in the air. The judge held the instrument of judicial authority with a loose, practiced grip, preparing to strike the sounding block and finalize the transfer. A thick, expectant silence blanketed the courtroom. Monica leaned forward in her chair, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes fixed on the descending wood. Behind her, Valerie gripped the gallery railing, her knuckles white with anticipation. The prize was mere millimeters away. Before the gavel could make contact, Nathaniel raised a single index finger. The gesture was small, yet it carried enough procedural weight to halt the entire process. "However, Your Honor," Nathaniel said. His voice was smooth, cutting through the stagnant air of the courtroom. "The defense wishes to ensure the court record reflects the full scope of this concession. By accepting the independent estate and asserting sole ownership of the Bellevue Limited Liability Company, the plaintiff assumes total responsibility for all associated corporate entities. As the undisputed inheritor, Monica is now legally responsible for all verified liabilities, outstanding debts, and pending audits attached to that specific portfolio." The judge paused, the gavel resting an inch above the block. He peered over his spectacles, scrutinizing the plaintiff's table. "That is standard probate procedure, Counselor," the judge affirmed. "The heir assumes the entirety of the estate, taking both the assets and the obligations." He looked toward Monica and her high-priced litigator. "Does the plaintiff acknowledge and accept these terms?" Monica nodded eagerly, a radiant, triumphant smile illuminating her features. Her attorney, focused entirely on the promised $1.5 million payout, waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. "We accept the standard terms, Your Honor. My client is ready to assume full control of the entity." The judge nodded. He brought the gavel down. The sharp, decisive crack echoed off the marble walls, sealing the legal transfer. It was binding. It was irreversible. The defensive maneuver was complete. I unclasped the brass locks on my leather briefcase. I stood up, lifting a thick, spiral-bound dossier from the interior compartment. The document contained 300 pages of forensic accounting encrypted emails and offshore banking transcripts. I walked toward the bench with deliberate, measured steps, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I did not look at Valerie or Monica. I maintained eye contact with the judge, presenting the heavy file to the court clerk. "Your Honor," I stated, projecting my voice to ensure every syllable reached the gallery. "Since the court just formalized the plaintiff's ownership of the Bellevue entity, it is my legal duty as a corporate auditor to submit this verified financial disclosure regarding her newly acquired liabilities." The clerk handed the dossier up to the bench. The judge opened the cover, his eyes scanning the executive summary I had meticulously drafted. The quiet satisfaction at the plaintiff's table began to fray. Monica's attorney frowned, a sudden ripple of unease tightening his features. He stood up, requesting a copy of the submission. Nathaniel handed him a duplicate folder. I turned to face the courtroom. "The Bellevue entity is not a consulting firm," I explained, keeping my tone clinical and detached. "It is a dedicated laundering shell. Over the past 18 months, the deceased utilized that specific corporate structure to fence $4 million in stolen, restricted aerospace components from his Everett manufacturing plant." The silence in the room shattered. A low murmur of shock swept through the gallery. The judge flipped the pages of the dossier rapidly, his judicial composure fracturing as he absorbed the falsified shipping manifests, detailing missing titanium turbine blades, and the illegal offshore routing numbers. The stolen hardware was liquidated through gray market channels. I continued pacing slowly in front of the defense table. The illicit funds were deposited directly into the Bellevue accounts. Since the plaintiff just demanded and accepted sole legal ownership of that entity, she has officially claimed possession of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. She is now the primary beneficiary of a staggering federal wire fraud operation. The color drained from Monica's face. The triumphant glow vanished, replaced by a sickly, chalky pallor. She stared at the thick folder in her attorney's hands, her breathing turning shallow and rapid. She clutched the infant tighter, her eyes darting frantically around the room as the gravity of the situation materialized. The child let out a distressed cry, sensing the sudden rigidity in his mother's arms. She had walked into the courthouse expecting a fortune. She was walking out, holding an immense federal debt. Her attorney flipped through the financial ledgers, his hands beginning to shake. The polished, confident litigator dissolved into a panicked legal advocate. He realized his client was suddenly on the hook for millions in stolen corporate funds. He looked at the judge, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "Your Honor," the attorney shouted, waving the dossier in the air. "We request an immediate recess. We petition to withdraw our claim. My client had no idea about the fraud. She is an innocent mother mourning her partner. She was wholly unaware of these illicit transactions." I pivoted toward the plaintiff's table. I did not raise my voice, but the sharp clarity of my words cut through his frantic defense. I walked over to the digital evidence projector sitting near the clerk station. I withdrew a single sheet of paper from my suit pocket. It was the medical explanation of benefits I had extracted from the corporate health portal. I placed the document face down on the illuminated glass plate. "She is not an innocent mother," I stated, meeting Monica's terrified gaze. "And she was never a partner." I tapped the control panel projecting the medical receipt onto the large screen mounted on the courtroom wall. The stark black and white clinical text magnified for the entire room to read. I highlighted the specific procedural codes and the final physician summary. "Derek Weaver underwent a voluntary, irreversible vasectomy 4 years ago," I declared. The words hung in the air, a devastating truth, obliterating the foundation of their entire narrative. He possessed the medical records confirming his permanent sterility long before he ever met you. He knew that 6-month-old baby was not his biological child. Monica slumped back in her chair. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Behind her, Valerie let out a strangled, breathless gasp. The older woman stared at the medical report on the screen, her eyes wide with horrified comprehension. The biological grandson she had fought so fiercely to protect, the child she had used to justify her extortion, was a total stranger. The legacy she coveted was a ghost. Lauren sank lower into the wooden bench, her previous arrogance replaced by wide-eyed terror. "He did not forge that secondary will out of love," I explained, looking directly at Monica. "He needed a pristine, untraceable Social Security number to register the offshore accounts and shield his illegal income. A newborn infant provided the perfect tax shelter. He used your child's identity to launder stolen aerospace funds, and you willingly helped him operate the shell company. The trap was permanently locked. By demanding the estate, Monica had tethered herself to the crime. By forcing the judge to validate the forged will, her attorney had legally stripped away any plausible deniability. They had spent the entire week constructing an elaborate public relations smear campaign to steal my wealth, unaware they were digging their own financial grave. The judge slammed his gavel down, restoring order to the chaotic room. He stared at the plaintiff with a stern, unforgiving glare. He instructed the clerk to seal the financial dossier and notify the proper authorities. The probate hearing had transformed into a criminal referral. I gathered my briefcase and secured the brass clasps. I had successfully insulated my corporate career, protected my waterfront home, and secured my independent assets. I optimized the transfer of the toxic liability, handing the burden directly to the adversaries who sought to destroy me. As I turned to walk down the center aisle, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 2 individuals dressed in sharp, dark suits stepped into the gallery, their faces grim and professional. The transition from a civil dispute to a federal investigation was about to commence, pulling the final thread on Monica's unraveling reality. The transition from a civil probate hearing to a federal criminal detention happened with breathtaking, chaotic speed. The 2 agents from the white-collar crime division did not wait for Monica's attorney to formulate an objection. They bypassed the wooden railing of the gallery, their badges clearly visible against their dark suits. One agent approached the plaintiff's table, placing a heavy hand on the back of Monica's chair, while the other positioned himself near the courtroom exit, effectively sealing the room. The judge watched the scene unfold with grim satisfaction, his gavel resting quietly on the bench. He had just witnessed an attempted hijacking of the judicial system, and the immediate consequences were playing out before his eyes. Monica's initial shock shattered into full-blown hysteria. She clutched the infant to her chest, her voice pitching into a shrill, desperate shriek. "You cannot do this!" she screamed, thrashing wildly against the agent's grip. "I did not know about the money. I just signed the papers Derek gave me. I am just a mother." "Ignorance is not a defense against wire fraud," the lead agent stated, his voice flat and authoritative. "You are the sole registered owner of the Bellevue Limited Liability Company. That entity has been identified as the primary laundering vehicle for $4 million in stolen federal aerospace assets. You are being detained for questioning regarding corporate embezzlement, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Her attorney, realizing the catastrophic liability his client now represented, physically distanced himself from the table. He gathered his briefcase, his face pale, offering no further defense. He was a probate litigator, not a federal criminal defense attorney, and he had just actively participated in legally binding his client to a massive criminal enterprise. In the front row of the gallery, the secondary shockwave hit my in-laws. Valerie collapsed back onto the hard wooden bench, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Her breathing became ragged, hyperventilating, as the reality of the situation crushed her fabricated world. The biological grandson she had fought so fiercely to protect, the child she had used to justify her lobby extortion and her vicious social media smear campaign, was a complete stranger. The genetic legacy she coveted was a ghost, a prop utilized by her son to shield his illicit wealth. Even worse, the fortune she lusted after the empire she believed Monica was securing for their shared benefit did not exist. The only inheritance awaiting them was a massive, insurmountable federal debt and the very real threat of long-term imprisonment. Lauren tried to sprint out of the gallery. She scrambled over the wooden benches, her previous arrogance replaced by pure, wide-eyed terror. She reached the heavy oak doors, desperate to escape the blast radius, but the second federal agent intercepted her. He firmly blocked her path, instructing her to return to her seat. As an active participant in the extortion attempt and a vocal amplifier of the fraudulent GoFundMe campaign, she was now a person of interest in the ensuing investigation. I stood at the defense table, methodically securing the clasps on my leather briefcase. I felt no pity for the women unraveling before me. They had attempted to destroy my career, steal my wealth, and frame me for murder. They had demanded a toxic asset, and I had simply optimized the transfer. Nathaniel, my attorney, leaned over, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "That was the most flawless execution of legal judo I have witnessed in 30 years of practice," he murmured. "You did not just defeat them, you legally mandated their destruction." I nodded, my posture remaining rigid and professional. I did not linger to watch Monica being escorted out of the courtroom, the crying infant temporarily handed over to Child Protective Services, until a legitimate guardian could be located. I did not stay to hear Valerie's frantic, breathless apologies, as she realized her country club reputation was permanently obliterated. I walked out of the King County Courthouse, the heavy oak doors closing behind me, sealing the chaos inside. The Seattle rain had finally stopped, leaving the downtown streets slick and clean. The air smelled sharp and cold. The immediate aftermath of the hearing required swift, precise action. Because my personal finances were meticulously kept separate throughout the marriage, and because I had formally legally conceded Derek's independent estate before the federal audit commenced, my assets remained entirely insulated. The corporate life insurance policy, valued at $1.5 million, remained untouched by the federal freeze. Since the secondary will was proven to be a fraudulent instrument utilized in the commission of a felony, the insurance underwriters defaulted back to the original beneficiary designation. The funds were quietly routed into my primary single-signer account within 72 hours. My waterfront home in Kirkland, purchased primarily through my corporate bonuses, remained secure. I listed the property on the market the following Monday, eager to liquidate the physical remnants of a deceptive marriage. The house sold above asking price to a tech executive within 2 weeks. The corporate fallout required a direct, unyielding approach. I returned to my glass-walled office at the global e-commerce giant exactly 48 hours after the probate hearing. I did not wait to be summoned. I walked directly into the suite of the vice president of auditing, bypassing his executive assistant. I placed a sealed copy of the federal indictment charges against Monica on his polished oak desk. I included the official press release from the White-Collar Crime Division detailing the recovery of the stolen aerospace components and the exposure of the Bellevue laundering shell. "The smear campaign has been neutralized," I informed him, my voice carrying the absolute authority of a director who had just protected her perimeter. "The individual responsible for the defamatory social media posts is currently in federal custody. The narrative has been corrected." Victor read the documents, his pragmatic features softening into a look of profound respect. He recognized the sheer logistical brilliance required to orchestrate such a comprehensive reversal. He did not offer an apology for his previous ultimatum. In our world, results are the only currency that matters. He simply nodded, sliding the documents back across the desk. "Excellent work, Christina. I expect the quarterly compliance report on my desk by Friday." 3 months later, the landscape of my life had entirely shifted. I sat in my new corner office having secured a promotion to Senior Director of Global Logistics. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the sprawling Seattle skyline, the Space Needle piercing the low-hanging clouds. I held a cup of warm green tea, the steam rising in the quiet, climate-controlled air. The legal updates regarding my former adversaries arrived sporadically, each one confirming the absolute finality of their ruin. Monica was facing multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to launder federal assets. The evidence against her, primarily the very financial ledgers she had fought so hard to inherit, was insurmountable. She was looking at a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. Valerie and Lauren were drowning in the consequences of their own arrogance. The viral GoFundMe campaign they had so eagerly promoted was flagged by the platform for fraud. They were forced to return every donated dollar, draining their personal accounts. Furthermore, the audio recording I had captured on my smartwatch provided undeniable proof of felony extortion. To afford the exorbitant retainers for their criminal defense attorneys, Valerie was forced to liquidate her defining assets. She sold her luxury SUV. She resigned her membership at the Mercer Island Country Club in disgrace, unable to pay the annual dues. The affluent social circle she had prioritized above all else shunned her, completely horrified by her involvement in a federal scandal. She was financially ruined, stripped of her prestige, and facing significant jail time for attempting to fabricate a homicide investigation. They had all believed that justice was a loud, emotional spectacle. They thought whoever screamed the loudest or cried the hardest on social media would ultimately win the narrative. They failed to understand that true, absolute justice is never an emotion. Justice is a flawlessly executed audit. It is the meticulous tracking of every liability, the precise calculation of every risk, and the seamless transfer of a toxic asset directly into the hands of those foolish enough to demand it. I took a slow sip of my tea, looking out over the city I had conquered, my ledger perfectly balanced, my perimeter forever secure. The stories we tell ourselves about family are often woven with threads of unconditional love, endless patience, and an unspoken agreement that ties of blood excuse all manner of sins. We are taught, especially within the framework of traditional American family structures, that maintaining peace is paramount, that the matriarch must be revered, and that a husband's loyalty is an unbreakable vow. But what happens when the very foundation of that family is built not on love and mutual respect, but on the silent, uncompensated labor of one individual? What happens when the ledger of emotional and financial investment becomes so lopsided that the entire structure threatens to collapse? The narrative of Christina Weaver is not merely a tale of a scorned woman exacting revenge. It is a profound masterclass in the necessity of establishing boundaries, demanding accountability, and understanding the true meaning of value within a family. It serves as a stark reminder that while love may be free, respect and dignity must be earned, and sometimes the most loving act we can perform for ourselves and for the integrity of our families is to stop cleaning up other people's messes. Christina's journey begins in the epicenter of the American dream: a successful corporate career, a marriage to an aerospace manager, a waterfront home in Kirkland. Yet beneath this polished veneer, a parasitic reality thrives. Her mother-in-law, Valerie, and her husband, Derek, operate under the delusion that Christina's quiet competence is an endless resource they can exploit without consequence. They mistake her stoicism for weakness, her meticulous management for subservience. They believe that because she does not scream or demand constant validation, she is indifferent to their transgressions. This dynamic is a common pitfall in many relationships, where one partner assumes the role of the perpetual caretaker, silently absorbing the stress and logistical burdens, while the other reaps the benefits of a stable life. The true tragedy of this story is not the discovery of Derek's infidelity or his massive corporate embezzlement. It is the insidious long-term erosion of trust and partnership. It is the realization that the man she married was not a partner, but a predator, who viewed every human connection, including a child, as a tactical advantage. He weaponized the concept of family to shield his illicit activities, demonstrating a profound lack of the very values that are essential for raising children and sustaining a healthy home. When we consider parenting values and family responsibility, we often focus on the tangible, providing shelter, education, and financial security. But the intangible elements are arguably more critical. Honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness are the bedrock upon which resilient children and strong families are built. Derek's actions, his deceit, his exploitation of Monica and her infant, his willingness to let his mother demean his wife, are the antithesis of these values. He was teaching by example a lesson in manipulation and self-preservation at the expense of others. Christina's response to this betrayal is where the true lesson lies. When confronted with the collapse of her marriage and the hostility of her in-laws, she does not succumb to the expected hysteria. She does not engage in a futile screaming match or attempt to win back a man who has already abandoned her. Instead, she pivots to a forensic logistical takedown. She understands that engaging emotionally with individuals who lack empathy is a losing battle. She chooses data over drama, logic over tears. This approach is profoundly unsettling to those who rely on emotional manipulation to maintain control. Valerie and Monica expect a broken, desperate widow. They anticipate that Christina will surrender the estate to avoid public humiliation and the threat of a fabricated homicide investigation. They fundamentally miscalculate her strength because they only understand power as volume and aggression. They cannot comprehend the lethal precision of a woman who optimizes billion-dollar global supply chains. The brilliance of Christina's retaliation is that she uses their own greed against them. When Monica demands the estate, brandishing a forged will, Christina does not fight for it. She recognizes the estate for what it truly is: a toxic asset, a laundering shell for stolen aerospace components. By formally conceding the estate to Monica, Christina legally transfers the massive federal liability along with it. She optimizes the transfer and lets her adversaries absorb the destruction. This narrative subverts the conventional wisdom that we must always fight to hold on to what is ours. Sometimes, the most powerful move is to let go. When an adversary demands something that is fundamentally corrupted, fighting to retain it only entangles you in their toxicity. The true victory is not in possessing the asset, but in preserving your own integrity, your peace, and your future. As we navigate the complexities of our own families and relationships, we must ask ourselves, are we maintaining peace at the cost of our own dignity? Are we quietly absorbing the burdens of those who refuse to carry their own weight? Are we teaching our children that love means endless sacrifice without reciprocity? We must learn to audit our relationships with the same meticulous care that Christina audited her household ledger. We must be willing to confront the uncomfortable truths, to demand accountability, and when necessary, to sever ties with those who view our competence as an invitation for exploitation. True family responsibility is not about blind loyalty. It is about fostering an environment where honesty, fairness, and mutual respect are non-negotiable. Christina's story is a stark reminder that justice is rarely handed to us. It is something we must meticulously engineer ourselves. It is a testament to the fact that our lowest moments do not have to define us. They can serve as the catalyst for our greatest victories. If you found value in this narrative of resilience and calculated retribution, I encourage you to follow Melissa Told Stories for more content that challenges conventional thinking and explores the raw, unfiltered realities of human relationships. In the end, perhaps, the most profound lesson is this: the most dangerous adversary is not the one who screams the loudest or strikes the first blow. The most dangerous adversary is the one who remains silent, watching you construct your own demise, secure in the knowledge that they hold the key to the trap you have so eagerly walked into. And perhaps, if we look closely enough at the ledgers of our own lives, we might find that the debt we are working so hard to repay is not ours at all.